Hello coaches, and welcome to this presentation looking at the formations and systems of 11v11. And today's presentation we're looking at the 1-4-3-3, and I'm joined by Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching and Education for United Soccer Coaches. Hello Ian.
Hello David, pleasure to be here.
So as with all of these presentations, we have a template that we're following, and as you can see on the screen, here's the agenda for today's session. And Ian, we're going to talk to begin with, as we do with each of these presentations, on the numbering and basic shape, attacking and defending of the 1-4-3-3.
So as suggested in the way we write this out, 1-4-3-3, initially we're talking about 4 lines of the team, and the first of those lines obviously being the goalkeeper. Our second line, in a fairly standard interpretation of the 1-4-3-3, would be a back 4, and this numbering system kind of makes sense. Most of the players are beginning to understand what the numbering system is. And then our third line would be our 3 midfielders, but what starts to become very critical now for the coach is to determine the orientation of those 3 midfielders. So they could be flat, as diagrammed here, but if you follow the yellow arrows, you could see how you could perhaps get into a triangle of 1 deep, 2 high, or 2 deep, 1 high. So the line can morph as the game plays on. And then finally, a nice feature of the 1-4-3-3 is that our fourth line is heavy with players, relatively speaking. And traditionally that's a central player with 2 flank players. And again, as the yellow arrows indicate, how you orientate those players, whether you have the 7-11 very wide or you have them pinched in a little bit, becomes an idea for the coach based on his personnel and his or her preferences for the way the team plays, and the formation is dispersed. So one of the features of the system that's really positive is that our fullbacks can be meaningfully engaged in attacking play with the number 6, or at least one person, staying home to protect the 2 centre-backs. So if the 2 centre-backs can be protected by midfielders, our 2 and 3, our fullbacks, can be meaningfully engaged in the attacking play. As we progress from 2 and 3, we see how our 3 midfielders can be deployed into attacking shape. In this case, the number 6 stays home, but now 10 and 8 become additional forwards to join in with 7, 9, and 11. Other highlights of the system and the formation in the system is how we orientate, again, these critical 7 and 11 in terms of their ability to support the number 9 and provide service to the number 9, be it from a cross or be it from combination play in and around the top of the box. The biggest challenge with the 1-4-3-3 very often is defending of the wide space, because the 3 central midfielders, if they're quite narrow, it does put pressure on the fullbacks. So we look here at probably one of the single biggest threats to this system defensively, when the opponent gets into the space between the fullback and the wide forward. What we see here is that we want the fullback, to engage, and then additional cover for that player would come from the 3 midfielders shifting across the park, and possibly from the high forward doubling down from the ball side.
Ian, do you see a scenario in a 1-4-3-3 where the numbering would be different or reflect a slightly different interpretation of the system?
Absolutely. Sometimes we might determine that we don't actually have a number 10 player, that's to say sort of our creative quarterback type player. And instead, what we actually employ is 2 defensive central midfielders, 2 number 6s, and then our number 8 is our box-to-box attacking runner and additional midfield cover. Sometimes, and there were examples of this through the World Cup of 2018, is we may play with exclusively 1 winger, but actually play with 2 number 9s. So there are potentials to morph it around, but in the youth game, it's traditionally much more straightforward to align the players in the 1-4-3-3 and give everybody kind of part of the numbering system specific functional roles. So one of the things we did when we looked at the program was we identified as our favorite potential formations and systems some of the potential strengths and of course some of the potential vulnerabilities of the formation as it becomes a system. And one of the things that I particularly like with the 1-4-3-3 is we give very clear opportunity for the wingers, if they become wingers, to attack opponents one-on-one in the wing space. So if we have developed players, number 7s and numbers 11s, who can dribble, they have pace, they can cross it, and they're brave enough to take opponents on, there is the opportunity here to isolate the opposing defenders one-on-one in high attacking positions. So I think that's a real potential positive of this formation as it becomes a system. Additionally, the movement of 7 and 11 can really put a lot of pressure on a back four. So as we see here, 7 and 11 have begun to pinch in. As they pinch in, it will make the opposing fullbacks close in too. And now space is offered up in the wide space for other players to join into the attack. So the ability and the mobility of 7 and 11 can really mess about and change the way that the opponent chooses to defend. And so now the attacking team is proactive in the way they move the opponent around.
Now, Ian, in this diagram, we're showing the 7 and 11 moving from a position inside to out. And of course, they've got a significant amount of ground to cover. Would you see them potentially getting and then forcing the play in?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it really talks to me a little bit about what are the natural inclinations of this player. So there's two ways to take it. If the player naturally move in and give them the cues and keys to move in, or do you require them to be inside initially and let them gravitate back to their more positive position? So it's really horses for courses, but clearly as the system develops, the players need to understand the ability or the need to show the opponents different looks. So whether that's inside to out or outside to in, whether it occurs in the midfield or higher up the field, again, that's really for each coach's context, but it's a critical part. It's not enough to say 3 of you go stand up top. You must then give them the opportunity to interpret that in different ways. One of the features of the 1-4-3-3 is that you have this central striker potentially alone. And this central striker could be a very tall, strong, robust player. It could be the player that's quicker than lightning, but short, diminutive, kind of a goal poacher. But one of the key things is the number 9 will almost certainly engage at least 2 opponents if he or she stays centrally. And so now 2 centre-backs are tied up by the one number 9. The movement of the number 9 poses problems for the 2 centre-backs. So here, if the number 9 moves towards the ball, what do the 2 centre-backs do? And where is space potentially vacated because of number 9's movement? And so, again, if this number 9 is able to check to, if the 2 centre-backs are engaged in watching what number 9's doing, and timing is good and the offside condition is observed, we have the ability for our midfielders, in this case the number 8, to run beyond that number 9 striker. So in the 4-3-3, the number 9 should be engaging the centre-backs. He or she should be the highest player on the field, but their mobility, be it left and right or up and down, will now create space for players like 8, 7, 11, maybe 10, certainly possibly 2 and 3, to really unbalance the opposing team and run attackers in at them from different places all over the field. And one of the key features of the 1-4-3-3, and one of the reasons it's so popular with coaches that are seeking to develop youth players, is that the attacking team has a good field dispersal in possession. And so if your key players in the midfield, the number 10, are able to gain possession and give an opportunity to retain possession, they have potentially 2 and 3 joining in. They have 1, 2, 3 players high, and then they have other midfielders that could be potentially checking to or running away. So the opportunity, if good possession is maintained, to cover the field from an attacking perspective and really stretch the opponent is really, really high if this formation is used appropriately, and the players are given the opportunity and encouraged to get forward, and possession can be retained.
Ian, can you just speak to the relationship between the wide, high player on one side of the field and their teammate in the fullback position, and the distance between them and the timing of their runs forward?
Absolutely. So we're talking now primarily in possession. So there is the opportunity for 2 and 7, and of course on the other side 3 and 11, to combine in combinations of give and goes and overlaps and those types of things. And if the opponent is very deep and compact, then 2 and 7 potentially could be very close together. In this particular instance, where the ball is a little bit deeper in the field, in the midfield, the distance between 2 and 7 can become quite large. So rather than being directly involved in technical combination, the movement of 7 encourages movement and space for the number 2. Of course, the potential here is that the number 7 checks out, and there now becomes a potential angle for the 2 to run in. So sometimes their relationship is based on a lot of physical proximity, and sometimes there's an impact on their relationship because of the distances between them, which can actually be very positive too. And so much to the question that David just had for me is, if the opponent is encouraged to compact, let's say in this case about the width of the penalty box, so the movement of the midfield, the forward running of number 8, the inside running of 7 and 11, has really brought the opponents together. And now you can see the great opportunity for 2 and 3 to be sprung into the attack and have spaces to run into. So one of the important parts of coaching methodology within the US, the traditional coaching methodology, is that we have robust attacking principles of play and defending principles of play that dovetail together. So as we look at attacking and we use these themes with our players, we must refer continually back to the principles of play. So these are the 5 principles of attack, and they come out in the order we would start to address them. First of all, we want to make sure that we can penetrate in the attack. And so the most obvious way to penetrate is a shot at goal or an attempt at goal. So when we're starting to help our players with this understanding, and we're looking at a system like the 1-4-3-3, the most pure form of penetration is our central striker, hopefully our goal scorer, our best goal scorer, putting the ball in the back of the net. So that is the simplest, most direct, most obvious and blatant idea of what penetration means in a system and a formation like this. How that number 9 gets into position to get that strike at goal, and of course it won't be exclusively the number 9, but we're talking about perhaps your dominant goal scorer. One of the very effective ways in this system is that our wingers or our attacking wide players are putting services into the box for that player to finish. Of course, the service could come from other places deeper in the field through the center, but a very effective and direct way to play this type of formation and system is to get the ball wide, get it in high positions, and then make services into the box, in this case from the right side, where the number 9 can attack it, possibly a midfielder can attack it, and even the wide side, or the weak side, excuse me, midfielder can come in and attack it. And then one of the other features, penetrating features of this, is the 7 and 11, again, their mobility to either threaten the opponent to the outside of the fullback, but also demonstrate their ability to threaten between the fullback and the centre back, can really impact the opportunities in different ways that the central players and the central striker can receive the service they need to penetrate and finish at goal. So again, we're looking to unlock opponents with the use of the system, the use of the formation, and the way we employ it as a system.
One of the things that's really interesting about this system to me, Ian, is the starting positions of the 7 and 11. In this case, we've shown the starting position to be very narrow, which opens the opportunity on the outside. Equally, if they were to have positioned in a wide position, that means that the fullback probably would have to come out and engage, leaving room in the middle. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think a nice understanding, especially for a youth player, is sort of the poor man's blanket. So if the 7 starts out here, the fullback does potentially get drawn out, and now a space is created on the inside. Conversely, if the 7 is tucked in maybe here and moves into here, and the fullback has to draw in, now there's space here. So the poor man's blanket concept is, as I make an adjustment, the opponent has to make an adjustment, and they do that to be safe, but they expose themselves somewhere else because the blanket isn't big enough to cover all the attacking possibilities if the formation and the system is imposed intelligently. And it is also, we show variation in it, so the defender's never quite settled as to what's going to happen. As we now look in terms of support, so the next principle of play after we've got the idea of strikes at goal. In a system like this, the clearest relationships of support in many cases is the support relationship between 2 and 7 and 3 and 11. So if one of those 4 players has the ball, in some form they're receiving support, typically from the other flank player on their side. And when our wide player has the ball, high wide player, support is pretty easy to understand as the potential to combine, overlap, be behind them. But it's the case that sometimes the deeper player, in this case here, we see 7 has the ball, and support is actually coming, as 7 has the ball, support is actually coming ahead. So support is not always given from behind the person in possession. It can certainly be provided by players in front of the ball coming back and checking to it or running into deeper space. And then critically, and sometimes a little bit unaddressed by coaches, is if we're going to play a possession style and we want to support the play, the 4 and 5, when we have the ball, are not defenders anymore. They're part of the possession unit, as is the goalkeeper. So if the opponent is organized, compact, the movement of our forward players and the movement of the ball is not unlocking the opponent, then sometimes we can actually just come back and play around using our goalkeepers and our centre backs to draw the opponent out and give ourselves the opportunity to find different spaces to attack. So all of the players have a function in support, not just the players that are designated as the primary attacking threat. And what I, again, really like about this system, formation to system, is if we can keep that number 9 high and central, tightening up their opponent, keeping the opponent honest, keeping them in and around the center of their own goal. And if the number 9 vacates that space, making sure a player like the number 8 is taking it, we are always in some form dictating to the opponent how they must defend us, because we've put our players into certain areas where they must be addressed by the opponent, and therefore we have potential for space and numerical advantage somewhere else on the field. So now we look at mobility, and we've addressed this quite a lot in terms of our wide players, but we also now look at how the central midfield can be running off the ball. So as the number 9 is making a check back here, his mobility has created a run for 8. Maybe it's created an opportunity for number 11 to come across. So the mobility of the number 9, the mobility of the 7 and 11 opens up opportunities for each other, but certainly for the corresponding midfield players. And in this case, we see how the 8 has run in behind 9, something we've addressed previously. So they've seen the space that 9 has made available. This is what we might call a third man run, because the action is between 4 and 9, but 8 has moved into the attacking space off the ball. Harder for defenders to track because they're typically drawn to what's happening immediately around the ball. So as players run into spaces behind, defenders can often be caught looking over their shoulder, wondering where that player just came from.
Ian, this type of movement pattern seems something that would be worked on significantly in practices. How much time would you dedicate to practicing this type of movement patterns, and at what age would you start that type of training? It's
an excellent observation that something as sophisticated as this 3-man pattern here between 4, 9, and 8 you might only see that a handful of times in 11v11. So you can't use the full game to establish these routines, give players the visual cues, the movement cues they need. So this type of movement is established in your 3v3 games, your 4v4 games, your small group in training, where you can have scores of repetitions of this type of movement. So it has to be in the training environment in smaller numbers. In my opinion, good competitive youth travel teams as young as 9 and 10, but certainly by the ages of 11 and 12, need to be thinking about 3 and 4 and 5 player movements in the attack, and elevating beyond either the single kid running away with the ball and shooting it at goal, or maybe just the 2 players that are immediately involved. We certainly, by the time we're 11 and 12 in competitive travel soccer, need to see these multiple player combinations and possibilities.
And one other point on this diagram that should not be underestimated is the role of the 2 and the 3 in helping to make the opportunity inside in the box happen, because their movement moving forward is certainly engaging some of the fullbacks and the opponents, so they aren't all compact around the box.
Absolutely. Anytime we have attacking space, if we demonstrate in the case as you identified that 2 and 3 are willing to take it, either the opponent has to make some corresponding adjustment, potentially creating space in the midfield, or they don't address it, and so 4 has that option for sure, but he or she can also play it out here and out here. So again, what it's not enough to do is have our back 4 and number 6 is just standing on the halfway line in the attack. We have possession, so all of our players, including our goalkeeper, is potentially an attacker because they're helping us possess the ball and threaten the opponent. Now, when we come to notions of not only mobility but width, a key feature from my perspective is having these channels available to us as often as possible, creating 1v1s or 2v1s in these situations, and making sure that even if our 7 and 11 are really more strikers than wingers, that they do get into these spaces at times to really draw out the opponent. Love the idea of overlapping attack. It's really good to see young players overlap, be brave, and 2 and 3 can be brave in this formation and system if the 2 centre-backs are always protected by the counter by a number 6 just being dropped in. So we have the ability to hurt the opponent centrally. We have the ability to hurt the opponent in the wide channels. And that's a nice thing about the 1-4-3-3 and why I think it's so popular with coached player development experts, because from a youth player's point of view, it gives a really good field coverage, especially in the attacking. And of course, when we're developing young players, the first thing we want to do is make them really comfortable in the attacking side of the game, because ultimately defending becomes a little bit easier to teach. And we need to get them really feeling comfortable and exploiting in an attacking sense. When we look at the 1-4-3-3 as opposed to, say, the 1-4-4-2, where there's a direct relationship with maybe 2 strikers, the opportunity now for the final principle of play, which is improvisation and creativity, can be really high. So if you've got players that like to do tricks and fakes and little turn the corners and little dipsy-doos, and we try to demonstrate here a back heel from the number 9 to the number 11, there's a great opportunity for creativity here, and we want creativity from our players. The idea being that in training, and certainly even in our competitive games, if we do something a little bit outside the box, we try something a little bit unique, we flick it, we heel flick it, we try a little combination, and we were to lose it, we are still dispersed around the field to potentially win the ball right back. We probably don't want to be doing these kinds of little improvisation, creative things in our own 6-yard box, but when we're in the attacking third, empower the players to take advantage of all of the players around them and experiment with different ways of unlocking the opponent. It won't always be a perfect combination. It might be something kind of cute and something that they haven't thought before.
And I think it's worth mentioning on this particular diagram, the proximity of the 7, 9, and 11 makes improvisation certainly possible. If they're further apart and they're not narrow and close in the box, then we're going to find that type of improvisation quite difficult.
Absolutely. And one of the things as a coach that you might look at is when you now come into the training environment, if you're aware that that distance there on a full-size youth field is 20 yards of width, and that distance, the full box, is 44 yards of width. So if you start to make areas based on the dimensions of the field, that square that I just created there might be the great place for these three players to play in training against 3 or 4 opponents. So you actually start to use the dimensions of the field, and the training protocols have to replicate what they're going to see in the game. If you try to train 3 players against 1 opponent and you use the whole field, that isn't what they're really going to see in the game. What they're really going to see in the game is, as you say, a lot of proximity to each other. So it's very tight, and it's usually very congested with opposing players too. So let's replicate that in the training so they're comfortable when they see it in the game.
Well, that's a real nice segue now to our next section of this presentation. We're now looking at attacking activities that relate back to the implementation of the principles in the 1-4-3-3. So Ian, let's talk about some activities, 3 activities that you might use to help draw out the strengths of this system.
Thank you, Dave. So let's be clear here. I would use these types of activities with my college players as well as my U9s, U10s, U11s. So these are not necessarily based on chronological age or technical ability. It's now really starting to see how the types of patterns and movements in these games occur that might relate and tie into what we see into the final game. So this is a simple 3v3 to end zones. The objective of the 3 red players in the field is to ultimately get the ball into the target player, as they've done here. So it's just a single direction. The reds go one way, the blues go the other way. And what we're looking at here is a pass has been delivered. The player has received the pass. Because of the overlapping run of this player, a space has been created that they have dribbled into and completed their pass. So it's a pretty straightforward little game. It doesn't involve goalkeepers and goals, but it gets 2 or 3 or 4 players working on being positive, moving forward, passing, combining, dribbling when needed. So a really straightforward activity, but really has a lot of potential impact on what we'll see in the final 4-3-3 attacking play when we get into the game. Another progression now from this activity. So it's not enough now just to hit the target, but another player, one of the players in the field, must ultimately get the ball played back from the target. So what we've seen here is there's a pass, a long pass, and as that long pass is happening, the player off the ball, the player on the wide left here, has demonstrated that they're ready to move in to receive it. So again, it's not enough now just to get it to the target. We've got to demonstrate that we're ready to move off the ball. In this case, the player has moved inside. The player could potentially have moved outside to receive the pass. But the idea is to score now, you must not only get the target, but you must have the ball drop back off the target. And that's one of the values of potentially the number 9 in the 1-4-3-3 formation.
And this one particular condition is excellent for training the striker. Often when we play into the target and then they win a point and the target just rolls the ball behind, we find that that isn't realistic to the game. Often we'll play the ball into the striker, who then needs to lay it back to the supporting number 8 or 10. And that happens in the game. So I think that's a really good condition that we could add to this game, Ian.
Yeah, it's a great point, because what we've actually got here is what we might consider a second phase. So when we only go to the target, the activity is done. Now we go to the target and have an additional scoring pass. And if you look at this from a coaching perspective, this player has the ball, so they can't hit the target. So they use the support of this player and they play a penetrating pass because they've managed to retain possession. This pass is a very good penetrating pass because the forward has supported and moved towards the ball. And then we've got the mobility and width of this player. So you can see how all of our principles of attack, or a lot of our principles of attack, start to get embedded in a really quite straightforward 3v3 plus targets. So a lot of real positive implication for what we might ultimately see on a Saturday afternoon when the kids get to play against an opposing 11. And then the additional progression here is that not only do we have to find the target, we have to find the way to penetrate, get forward, get into the attack here, in this case with a longer ball. And not only do we have to support off the ball, but now we've got to penetrate once we've got it back. So we've gone from hit the target, get it back, now hit the target, get it back, and run one of our guys into the end zone. So when we're talking about third player movement, when we're talking about compacting the opponent to create space, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at action here around the ball, defenders drawn in, support play from this red player, and then the red on the far side staying out of trouble, keeping his or her width. And once they do get the opportunity to get it, they're off to the races. So a really nice additional scoring type progression that adds more implication, positive implication to attacking play.
And one of the things that we talked about on the previous slide when we were looking at attacking principles was the movement of the number 8, number 10 beyond the number 9. So one thing that coaches can consider here is a further progression is to add a goal at the area behind, and then use this line as an offside line, and as we did before, having the striker play back and then the through ball into that zone with a player running on and potentially a defender and a goalkeeper.
Absolutely. So this training session, I will warn the audience, you have to be a little bit brave, but it can be a lot of fun. And if you are patient with it and you encourage your players and support your players, you can really get a lot out of this session in terms of combination play, communication, improvisation. So the activity, every player, in this case 10 players, are in the same colored uniform. And they're in the field, they're in 2 4v4s, and you determine which of the 2 4v4s. The target players are, in this case, the T1, the target one, begins the play by playing to one of the numbered team. He or she, T1, is now the support player. And the objective of player number 2 and his or her teammates is to get the ball combined up the field and find the attacking target. So it's very challenging for the players because you've got to be very clear on your teammates are. You've got to talk to your teammates. And when you start to see movement, you've got to be a little bit clear about what movement you're seeing and who's doing what role. So a challenge, but I've seen this done with 10, 11-year-olds, and with patience, you can have a very entertaining session. So it's 4v4 to targets, not hugely dissimilar from the previous activity, but the one caveat is everybody's in the same color. So quite an interesting challenge. And so the way the game works now, and we've got a really nice diagram here, is T1, as I indicated before, starts the play, but T1 can also be the support player. So the T1 has moved to keep the attack going. And so the T1 has helped the numbered team get down the field. We've got penetration here. And then we finally got the ball into the target. Now what happens is that the team that has scored the goal goes back the other way, but the target player joins their team, and the teammate who scored goes out. So now the players have to work out who their new teammate is, which way they're going. And so they're being asked to communicate, improvise, really be alert in the attacking environment. So you're creating a very challenging physical dynamic, and also a very challenging cognitive dynamic, which requires communication and good awareness, which is exactly the type of things that attacking players need when they're in the final third, where there's a lot of defenders, very little space, and they're trying to find a way through to goal. So this can be a really fun and useful training session.
Ian, if it was your preference to play the number 7 and 11 wider, would you consider bringing in to the outside wide channels?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that wide channels do is you would maybe say that once the ball is played wide, the player can move out there. If you start the players out wide, then width is not so valuable to them because you've already put them there. So what you do sometimes is you either make this field very narrow so the players really appreciate the value of width, or again, you have a wide channel. So let's say you use this channel between the billboards and the white line. And the condition would be if the ball is played out there, then you can go and get it. So now the players in the inside of the field are thinking, all right, let's knock it wide, and then players can start to disperse. So there's different ways of potentially using zones or channels. And then as the game is played, and again, a big challenge for the players cognitively, we see that the number team has the ball, number 2 has the ball. He or she has played it into number 4, but player B is intercepted and got it to player D. So there's been a turnover. On a turnover, we would allow the team that has won possession, in this case, the letter team, they could go either way, whichever target is most available. And the targets have to be alert. And we can see here that T1 has moved. T2 was already in a position, good position. And player D has won the ball and immediately got the ball forward. And we would applaud player D because they've immediately transitioned from defense, won the ball, and played and used our first principle of attack, which is just to penetrate. And from here, T2 would now come in the field for the letter team, and one of the letter team would go out, and now they attack the other way. So a really interesting multi-directional challenge for the players. And I would really encourage coaches to try this, maybe 5-10 minutes, be patient with it and come back to it, because it's a really fun activity, and you will elevate the level of your players once they become competent this in training. You'll see the payoff in games for sure. As we now take implications of the system or the formation to the system into a bigger scenario. So what we're looking at is here, we're working with the white team, and we have the white team arrayed very similar to the way they would be on a game day, except we've taken out the 7 and 11. So the key here is we've still got our number 9. And our number 9 is playing behind the 3 counter goals or the 3 objective goals. And so working with the white team, we start from the back. We have our attacking dispersal here. We have our fullback. We have our centre back. We have maybe another centre back or fullback. We've committed a player here. And what we're trying to do is get into the target player. And if we go all the way back to the little 3v3 plus targets, hit the target player, he or she drops it, and then we finish in one of these small goals. So what we're looking at is developing the attack from the back with a view to get it to our target, and then supporting our target to get to our 3 goals. So a very nice expansion of our theme, but still in a training game where we can have a lot of repetition, because every time we restart, the goalkeeper begins it, and we can really start to see these attacking patterns. Possibly after a while, we might start out on the side with a throw-in, and so we can look at different scenarios and different areas of the field where we build as a team into our target and then support our target. What we're looking at here is the importance of movement to create space again. So what we can see is we can see dispersal of players here. We can see players making check runs away from the action. So as the ball comes forward, the player has been high. He or she has seen the need to drop deeper, and now they're in a space to receive the ball on the blind side. So this notion of third player running, multiple players moving off the ball, not just focusing on the player in possession and maybe the player that receives it. The player in possession and the player who's most likely to receive it are a really big challenge for the opposing team. The attacking team should be exploiting that challenge. And then again, in the case of this player and this player, finding the seams, finding the spaces that may be the ones they can hurt the opponent with the most. And finally, sometimes in our training sessions, we have done well in our 3v3+1. Maybe we've used our activity with no colors. And when we get to the bigger numbers, sometimes it kind of breaks down a little bit. So maybe we failed in some of our initial training, or maybe we just need to manipulate the activity. So if you just take out one opponent because it's too great a challenge initially for the white team, you've given the white team more opportunity and clarity for where they might find the space. Other challenges you could put into this is that once we've hit our target and he or she has laid it back, the timing of our run to support, the quality of the drop pass from the target must be such that we can just finish with a one touch. So every coach has the ability to manipulate any activity, put in some challenges or decrease the challenge depending on the response of the players. Ideally, you make it a little bit easier to start with, and then you ramp up the challenge as they begin to get more comfortable in the activity.
Ian, how would you respond to coaches that say, 17 players in an 11v11 squad just isn't realistic for them? But obviously, in this case, we're working with the attacking team, so it's important that we do lay out as many numbers as we can to build up to 11 on the attacking side. How would you address that if, for example, you only had 14 or 15 players?
That's a very good question, David. So the first thing I would say is, and if the audience recalls, we're in the 1-4-3-3. So if I have a few less numbers, rather than play 3 in the back, I would probably just play 2 in the back. So I would play with my 2 center backs and show how they disperse wide. So this would be perhaps a center back, and this would be a center back. And then I would hopefully get my 1, 2, 3 midfielders and at least my 1 target, and maybe the guys running off of that 1 target are now the 7 and 11 if I had those numbers. If I lose players, what I want to do is I want to reconfigure the organization of the activity, but still try to honor the principles coming from the formation and system that I want to play. So I really critically have to have a single striker. I really critically have to have 2 guys in the back when we're in possession that can demonstrate how they can build. Ideally, I want to make sure I've got my 3 central midfielders. So I might sacrifice the 7, 11, the 2 and 3 positions initially. But again, to your point, everything can be adapted, but just try to adapt it with a logic based on what endpoint you're trying to get to with your 11v11.
So now we're going to talk about the game as it relates to defending, and Ian, we've principles of play to begin with.
Yeah, so just again, much like the 5 attacking principles of play, there are 5 corresponding defensive principles of play, and each one lines up with its counterpart on the other side of possession. So we try to penetrate, the opponent tries to pressure. We try to support or help, the opposing defenders try to cover the player giving pressure. We move around, we show width to unbalance and draw the opponent out. The opponent tries to remain balanced and compact. We want to be creative in attack and improvise, and the opponent, the defending unit, wants to be patient, disciplined, and demonstrate restraint. So what we have here is as a really nice defensive opportunity with this formation is the ability to defend high up the field. So with 7, 9, and 11, we can put a lot of pressure on the opponent when they're in possession, high on the field, and really set our stall as a front foot defensive team. In this particular case, and it's nicely diagrammed, is the ball is even behind the blue team, so they've got to recover to get it. And while his or her back is turned, we can immediately put pressure from behind and potentially win the ball very high up the field. So these 3 attackers across the field, when we don't have the ball, I think is a real highlight of the ability to press high up the park.
And it seems almost that a tactic for the attacking team, when there isn't an obvious pass, is actually to throw the ball up as high as possible, turn the defense, and then use the fact that we have 3 high players already in position to then put that pressure on. So somewhat of a what might be looked at as a negative attacking strategy is actually to put the ball in behind, give the ball to the opponent, and then press really high.
Absolutely. It's completely legitimate if your players in the back are feeling under pressure. Let's say this number 3 was really feeling a lot of pressure from the Blues. He or she has this safety release, if you will, where they can knock it forward, and they have a good idea that there's 3 players up there that potentially can chase down lost causes. So I really like the 4-3-3 from this point of view, from a defending perspective. It puts me on the front foot defensively. With the acknowledged probably greatest weakness of our system being the potential gap between the 2 wide players, our 2 and 7, and 3 and 11, it's important that our fullbacks, in this case number 3, does not get exposed one-on-one. And so the way that we prevent number 3 getting exposed one-on-one or number 2 is that 4 and 5 demonstrate the ability to shift laterally to provide cover. So number 3 is applying pressure, number 4 and 5 are sliding across to offer help. And the word for help in terms of a defensive side of things is providing cover. There will also be potential help coming from other places, but it's critical that 4 and 5 stay connected. And once 4 and 5 have given cover, hopefully on the goal side, so they're kind of in deep support or deep cover, excuse me, then we can see double downs from the number 10, the central midfielder, who slid across and can now apply pressure from the other side, or at least offer cover. So if the number 3 player, if the pressure is effective and they turn the opponent back, we want number 10 to be there, maybe number 11 to be there to try to pick their pocket on the other side of the play. And this is a real challenge for a lot of our young players. But sometimes when the action is over here defensively, players can go to sleep on the far side and just kind of hang out. And what we've demonstrated here with this picture is a really nice picture, is that the number 2 player, even though he is or she is the weakest side of the field, they've stayed very engaged and they've kept the line of the team defensively nice and compact. When we look at it, this space here is not the immediate threat. If the ball is played over there, the 2 still has ample time to get across. So the 2 is much better off for our team if he or she is staying connected to the rest of the line. And of course, if 2 has come across and number 7 has hung out, then there's a really big space for the opponent to run through. So in defense, when we're defending, typically the movement in infield from 2 or 3 is mirrored by their corresponding wide midfielder. So we're nice and compact now. If the ball is played and maybe our goalkeeper wins it and rolls it out to 2, then of course 7 can be dispersing offensively, but we want defensively this orientation between 2 and 7, and of course on the opposite side 3 and 11, to be really tight, so there are no obvious attacking holes in the central areas for the opponent. A very helpful way for the players to look at this in terms of shape, and it's demonstrated here or diagrammed here very nicely, is this notion of sort of a hockey stick. And the idea is that when the 2 is pulled up into maybe a higher position, maybe into the midfield to put pressure on the ball, there is corresponding slide and shift by 4 and 5 and 3. And so we get into this little hockey stick shape. And that's a nice visual for the players, and they can kind of see it and you can kind of show them. What you don't want is the team exclusively flat, because now the opponent has all of this space to attack. So we must apply pressure. Pressure is applied. We must come over and cover. Cover is there. And then 3 and 5 are providing balance and creating that hockey stick shape for us. Because we're not using 4 in the midfield, we're only using 3. It's quite critical that our 3 orientate themselves defensively to start with in the nice tight triangle in the center of the field. They don't want to get too spread out in a flat line because gaps occur. So the 3 has a different disposition than the 4. The 4 is a little bit more designed for covering side to side. The 3 midfielders protect the center of our park, and when they do get drawn outside, as demonstrated here, they kind of shift together so the triangle is maintained. You want to keep the triangle together as much as possible when you're defending in the 1-4-3-3. And what we can see here is that now our team has really demonstrated a lot of the principles. So we've got the hockey stick shape from these guys. Our 3 midfielders have maintained their triangle. And if we've got a fully engaged team, we may leave number 9 nice and high, but 7 and 11 can come into the park to compact the field. So now we're really starting to work on team compactness. And sometimes you would like all 11 guys to do that, but other times you leave your best young girl or young boy up high, and they can also tie up some of the opponents there. So they make the opponents honor that, but 7 and 11 can certainly come and double down and really make the field, make this a team defending opportunity with a nice compact field. Other features with good communication, where we set our attacking line, our attackers in terms of defending, is what we might call the restraining line. And so depending on the score, depending on the climate, how much time is left in the half, the energy levels of the kids, you may say to your front 3 players, let them have the ball in the back, drop down to, say, the top of the center circle, and we will begin our defending here. So we'll let the opponent pass it around here and play around with it. But once they get into this block, then we will start to engage. So sometimes in the 1-4-3-3, I want the 7, 9, and 11 up here, putting a lot of pressure high up the field. But other times we can show the opponent a different kind of look and drop down and start our restraining line much deeper on the field. In the same way that our front three determine when they start to defend and how they start to defend, we want them to be connected to what the 2, 4, 5, and 3 are doing. So here, the 2, 4, 5, and 3 have demonstrated they're going to start their defending line on the back of the center circle. So they've come up nice and high. They've pinched in, 2 and 3 have pinched in to protect the center of the field. And so now the real mess for the opponent is to get through this glob of players in the middle, and very difficult to penetrate centrally now. So we'd be looking to get the opponent to try to go around us. And then if we shift in unison, we can get the compactness. We're already quite compact, and we just shift laterally with short movements, and we can get 11 players fully engaged in defending, because the front three have set up a restraining line and the back four have set up a restraining line. And obviously, if we get into these very narrow bands, be it in the midfield, maybe perhaps higher up the field, there will be inevitably space behind us. And if our goalkeeper is a limited player and is stuck to the goal line, then there's a lot of attacking space should the opponent break our pressure or break through our lines. So part of effective defending in any system is that our goalkeeper is communicating and is mentally and physically engaged in defending the entire situation. So as we've managed to get our team in the middle of the field compact, our goalkeeper has to help us by being off their line to potentially be a sweeper keeper as need be.
So Ian, you've just talked about the defending principles of play and how that applies to the 11v11 game. So let's now talk about some of the activities that you might use to work with your team on developing those principles. Sure.
So I think when we start getting into the 11 and 12-year-old players, we should try to create numbers that allow us for demonstrated pressure, cover, and balance type opportunities. So in this particular instance, we've got a 6-goal game. So the red team is defending 3 yellow goals and attacking 3 red goals. So that's how it goes, just a 6-goal game. And what we've done here is we've actually suggested that the 8, 6, and 10 from your 11-a-side team, you put them in as a group in this, because they're the 3 guys or girls that are going to work together in the game. So in this particular instance, the coach has fed the ball in. The first principle of defending is to press the ball. And then the second principle of defending is that we must now come to cover and help the player that is trying to apply the pressure. So we've got just a real simple scenario here, 3v3, but there's a little bit more width in the game, which means that the 6, 8, and 10 in blue are going to be challenged to shift laterally as much as just step onto the ball. And what we see is that the pressure of 6 was good enough to force the opponent to play the ball wide. As the ball is traveling, the number 10 has made a longer run and got there to apply pressure. 6 is coming across to cover, and now 8 is coming on the inside of their opponent. And so that would be deemed to be a kind of a balance position, because they're balancing off the threat. And the idea of balance is to balance off the threat of the opponent with the ball, available space, and also players moving off the ball. So when we look at 8's movement here, they've done a really nice job of potentially being able to help number 10 if they break down. They're defending the space, and they've got the red player on the outside of them, which is a much better place than the red player being on the inside of them for a potential pass that they can't defend.
Ian, what we notice here is the number 6 has actually been drawn forward in the initial diagram to play against the deepest player on the red team. When we go back to the principles, we always saw the 6 playing deeper. Can you speak a little bit about what would happen in a situation where the 6 is drawn forward? What would you expect the 8 and 10?
So on the defending side of the ball, the key is that we appreciate and we communicate early enough where pressure is coming from. So there's absolutely no problem, as demonstrated in the previous slide, with the 6 being pulled up, as long as at least one, if not both, 8 and 10 make a corresponding defensive movement. So what we saw there was the triangle went from 1 deep to 2 high to actually 1 high and 2 deep. Another interesting feature here is if the number 6, once the ball has been played, recovers here, that's good because they're recovering towards goal, but they're leaving 10 exposed. So what we've seen is not only was 6 pulled up and 8 and 10 dropped in, but once 6 was played out of the game, she recovered on a diagonal, which gets her deep of the ball, but also allows her to help number 10. So that's a pretty intelligent looking run by the number 6 player there. And then finally, as we can see here, the ball has got out to this one flank. So the number 6 was effective in pressing. 8 and 6 had come over to help the number 10 press. We've now essentially cut the field in half, which means that we make play more predictable. We've put this player under, the player in possession is under pressure. And as they've tried to play the pass and they're playing a negative, a backward pass, we've intercepted. And then we demonstrate once we've won the ball in transition, how quickly can we penetrate? And in this case, the number 6 can just knock the ball through the goal. So again, we're trying to make this activity, make it from 3v3 with 3 goals to defend. We've kind of made it now more of a 3v2. We've only had to defend half the field. We've eliminated this player as a threat. And once we've won it, we've been able to attack goals. So it's a really nice example of how a team of 3, 6, 8, and 10, working together, communicating together, can very quickly get possession. And of course, what does the team want to do? The team would rather have the ball than not have it. So effective defending typically wins you a lot more possession that you can enjoy going off to attack goal with. Other ways of looking at it. So we kind of look there in a 4-3, the 4-3-3, the 3 central midfielders. Now we might look at how our back 4 defends. You could do this in a 6-goal game and use the back 4. Here we're using it to small goals without goalkeepers. And what we're asking the back 4 to do as much as possible is keep number 3 on the left, number 2 on the right, and 4 and 5 central. But if we see that 4 and 5 get dragged up or get dragged out, how do we make corresponding recovery runs to cover the gaps that have been left as we've been potentially pulled apart? And this is a nice example here. We see that perhaps the 2 has forced the blue back and the blue has switched the point of attack quite effectively. As that movement of the ball is occurring, as the ball is going from here and to here, this is when the entire team moves as a group. So 2 has come across because now they're the weak side player. 3 has been drawn out to the ball. 5 has been pulled across, and 4's there. Maybe 4 just drops in a tad. But what you've got is now this push and pull, and we're trying to get into that hockey stick type shape with our back 4. And what we can see is the coach is set up with a good supply of soccer balls. In this case, she can see the entire field. She can see the back 4 in their shape and give them plenty of opportunities to run through some of these scenarios so they can work as a unit in being a unit when it comes to game time on the Saturday. Once we see different types of challenges now. So what we have here is effective combination play from the blue team. So that's good, and they've managed to play the number 3 out of the play. 4 and 5 have come over to cover the number 3. Number 2 has come inside of their opponent and in a position to intercept the pass. So even though 3 has been played out of the game with an effective combination, the other 3 players, have moved across, and now there's actually the ability to intercept a square pass. So the back 4 will occasionally lose a player for any number of reasons, but as long as the other 3 players can fill the gaps, life can be sorted out quite quickly. So again, it won't always be perfect, and we will get broken down. The key is how we adjust to being pulled apart. It's not just accepting that we get pulled apart occasionally and they get in. That's not good enough. We've got to make sure that the other 3 players are maintaining engaged discipline for sure. Much like in our attacking themes, we try to work on things in small groups, 3 players, 4 players, and then we build it up into the full team picture. And so the group we're working here is with the red team. These are our front 6, if you will, in the 1-4-3-3. And we're going to start the game every time from the opposing goalkeeper. And then how do our 6 players work as a unit to hopefully make play predictable and or dispossess and ultimately counter to goal. So that's what we're looking here, and we're going to slightly more like a half field type scenario. And what we can see here is, in this particular case, the decision of 7 has been to force the opponent inside. So we want number 7, in this case, we've identified they're going to force it inside. If the number 7 is effective in communicating that by their movement, maybe by something they say, maybe by a shout, and we know this pass is going to happen, it allows 6 and 8 and 10 to engage even more closely centrally. And once that ball is played in behind the front 3, they can additionally double down. So the first thing we want to make sure is happening in this activity is that 7, 9, and 11, as the high players, are making play predictable in where the blues are forced, so that 6, 10, and 8 are fully engaged. So sometimes if 7 moves here, so the play will dictate down this way, 10, 6, and 8 they need to shift. But in this case, she's forced the play inside, so 6, 8, and 10 know exactly what they have to do next. So we've made play predictable, and that's a key component of effective team defending. And so as we've got the ball going inside, we've made a game-winning tackle here. At the moment of transition, the number 11 is split wide, which is what we want to do. Once we win the ball, let's use our width and mobility, our attacking principles, and a simple square pass and a channel created by the 11's movement outside gives us an immediate counter-attack. And so what's a great opportunity here is you're really training your front 6 to be effective defenders. And in the training game, the immediate payoff for good defending is a shot at goal. So you're not going to find too many of your players that won't enjoy this training session, especially your front 6 players, because you tell them you're working on defending. But of course, effective defending leads to more ball and leads to more goal scoring opportunities. So as we wrap up here, some of my thoughts about the 1-4-3-3. Key thought is that everybody can interpret the formation into their own system based on their own preferences and based on their players. But I hopefully given you a few ideas of how I might use it with a good group of youth players and certainly up through my college team. And again, the 1-4-3-3 is one of the most favored formations for youth player development. So it's a very, very popular one. It's endorsed widely across the world. Some of the things I like when we have the ball, there can be explicit functional roles. So we certainly want our 7, 11, 2, and 3 to demonstrate the physical and technical abilities to play in wide positions. We have a real role for the number 9, and one of those roles is keep the 2 centre backs of the opponent engaged. And you might do that because you're 6'2", and you might do that because you can run the 100 meters in 10 flat. So it would be different physical capabilities, perhaps, but they have a functional role. And then in the midfield, in possession, there is the opportunity for a creative player like a number 10. There's the opportunity for maybe a number 8 player who can run box to box and get in behind and get into spaces. So again, you're looking at explicit functional roles, and then you're looking at your unique player strengths. So you may have a player that has great vision, not necessarily the most physical player, the most athletic player, but he or she can see a pass. So they would be perhaps your number 10. You might have that player that's lightning quick and can cross the ball and likes to take people on one-on-one. Perhaps the wide space is for them. So you now start to evaluate your players and see if you can place them intelligently into the 1-4-3-3 based on your interpretation of the formation and system. I think with all good formations, we can always look at whether we attack wide and centrally, but I think 1-4-3-3 provides both opportunities for sure. Key defending issues. For me, the number one thing is that the centre backs are always protected by at least one player. So what we might call the number 6. We have to be aware that perhaps the most vulnerable space is that wide space between the 7 and 2 and the 11 and 3. Really like the idea that we can be proactive defensively by having our 3 forward players start our defending. I really like that idea. We protect in the 1-4-3-3, assuming we make our midfield into some form of triangle. We protect the heart of the team, which is critical. And if in our back 4 we play them a little bit more zonally. We don't play with a sweeper and a stopper, but we actually play them side by side. The ability to use the offside rule as a tool in our defending toolkit is really there. So our maturer players can now start to use the rules of the game in their formation and their implementation of the formation and system, and now start to use the rules of the game as an extra defender, as it were.
Well, that concludes our session on the 1-4-3-3. Thank you very much, Ian, for the great presentation. And coaches, we hope that you enjoyed this and that you will consider playing the 1-4-3-3 formation. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, David.